Hey guys, welcome back. Chapter 4, Section 3. We're going to look at some of the roles of species within their ecosystem. So let's go ahead and jump right in. Now, we've looked at food webs, food chains. You should have looked at some habitats, ecosystems before in other classes. We're just going to look at each one. And obviously, each species plays a specific ecological role. Whether it's grass that a grasshopper is eating, or it's producing the oxygen for us, it's a rabbit providing food for a coyote, etc., etc. A decomposer breaking it down, putting the nutrients back in the soil. It's all tied together and united. So let's look at some of the specific ones. Now, each species within it operates in what we call a niche. This is everything that affects that thing's survival and reproduction. The amount of water it needs, where it gets the water, the space that it requires, how much sunlight it needs, what kind of food does it have to get, whether that food is sunlight or food is some other insect, and a temperature range that it can exist in. These make up something's niche within its habitat. Now, a habitat is the type of ecosystem that it needs to survive, and different organisms exist in separate niches of a habitat. So don't get them combined. A niche is more specific than a habitat in a sense. For instance, one thing may live up in the trees, like a squirrel, and another thing may live on the ground, like a deer. They live in the same habitat, but they operate in separate niches. They also eat different food. So let's talk about these in two different terms. A generalist species and a specialist species. So a generalist species, this operates in a broad niche. It has a wide range of tolerance, where it can live, what it eats, etc. In the forest, a raccoon would be a generalist species. They have a wide range. They live up in trees, they're down on the ground, they will eat insects, they'll eat crawfish, they'll come into your trash at night, so they don't mind coming into the suburbs and existing there and going back in. Wide range of food, wide range of tolerance. We find them down in South Florida. We find them up in Maine. They exist where it's quite hot all the time. They exist where it can be very hot and very cold. Huge area. So this is a generalist species. Raccoon, or a human as well. Humans live in almost every environment on the planet. Very generalist species. A specialist species would be something like a giant panda, or maybe like a sand flea. All right, giant panda, very narrow niche and a very narrow range of tolerance. They go long times between reproducing, so they don't produce a lot of offspring. They tend to only eat bamboo. So if the bamboo gets threatened, the giant panda gets threatened. So they need a large kind of area, but to eat a very specific type of food. Another one, say like the sand flea. If you go down to the beaches all up and down the East Coast, right where the waves wash up and wash back, these little sand fleas move down, crawl down into the water. They live only really right up near the shore, and they specifically follow the tide up and down the shore. We only find them in this one little area, so it's a niche. Now, is it better to be a generalist species or a specialist species? Well, it sort of depends. If you're a generalist species, obviously you have wide range of where you go, but you have a lot of competition. Lots of things are trying to eat the same kind of things, live in the same kind of places that the raccoon lives. The giant panda doesn't have very much competition. There's not much out there that wants to eat the bamboo. So if they happen to live in an area that has large supplies of what they need, then the specialist species often have very little competition for what it is that they actually want, whether it's where they live, a temperature range that they exist in, etc. Like the sand flea, there's not a lot of other things that really want to be in that area. I mean, you do have other organisms in there, like the things eating the sand fleas, but it gives them a pretty narrow band. They're not in competition with most of the ocean, only the other things in that little niche. So there you go. Generalist versus species, dealing with a niche within a habitat. All right, there are 4 main roles that a species will play in an ecosystem. So you're going to have your native species. So in any ecosystem, the native species. These are indigenous to that area. And these normally live and thrive in a particular ecosystem, whether that's a forest ecosystem, whether it's a wetland ecosystem, whether it's a desert ecosystem, whatever it may be. This would be, say, like palm trees here in Florida. They grow here, they live here well, the temperature range fits them, etc. So this is a native species to Florida. Does well here, we see it here. It's not that Florida is the only place we see palm trees, but it is a native species to Florida. And you can also have non-native species. Now these either migrate here, a hurricane or storm blows them off course, a bird gets blown somewhere to where it normally doesn't really exist, butterflies, insects, whatever. Or they just literally get accidentally introduced into an ecosystem. A particular type of mussel attaches itself to a boat in one place and the boat travels somewhere else and then it dislodges there and it gets introduced into the ecosystem. Now, not all non-native species are invasive. We purposely bring some species into here, especially if we're raising animals. Certain types of chickens or even pigs or cows are not native to an area, but we're keeping them and they're not actually invasive. An invasive species is specifically a harmful non-native species. It's brought here for some reason. It may have been brought here inadvertently. It may have been brought here on purpose, but then got out, if you will. In Florida, down in the Everglades, the boa constrictors. They're not native to this area. People are letting their pets loose, but they're thriving in the area and causing a problem in the ecosystem. Or a plant would be the air potato. The air potato comes from Africa, actually, but it can grow like crazy in this environment, and it takes over trees, areas, and causes a problem. Kind of like kudzu in the South, where I came from in South Carolina, is kudzu. Kudzu was brought in for erosion control, but it winds up taking over huge areas, originally from China. So sometimes an invasive species, when it gets brought here, it has all the right conditions, and it doesn't have the predators or the diseases where it came from that kept it in check. So now it grows uncontrollably, causing a problem. So we have native species, non-native species, remember, can be beneficial, can be invasive, it depends. We also have what we call an indicator species. Indicator species are some species that we can look at and they kind of give us an idea of the health of the environment. If we find a lot of these type of species, the environment's good. If that species starts to dwindle or their numbers start to go down quickly, we step up and take notice, like a smoke alarm, if you will. The smoke alarm goes off in the house. It doesn't mean the house is burning down, but we do want to pay attention and find out what's going wrong and correct the problem. Yeah, I left the eye on my oven and the grease started to smoke. Well, I can take care of that. I can turn the eye off, I can take it off the heat, and it goes down. I don't do anything about it. Catches on fire, can burn my house down. So indicator species give us an early warning. We talked about the amphibians, like the frogs, how about 200 species of frogs have gone extinct since the 1970s. If we notice frog populations going down, smoke signal. We realize there's something wrong. They're an indicator. They give us an early warning because they're a little sensitive to the environment. And then we also have what we call a keystone species. Now, a keystone is what's put in an arch. I'll throw a picture of one up here. You make an arch. Well, right at the top of the arch, there's that little triangular shaped piece. That is the keystone. That keystone holds the whole arch together. You remove the keystone and the whole arch collapses. Well, we think there are certain species that serve as a keystone for certain ecosystems, that without that species, the entire ecosystem, or at least large parts of it, would collapse. They just have a huge effect on an abundance of other species. Doesn't seem like it, but in fact, they really do. Well, let's take a look at the Native American alligator as a keystone species. The American alligator, think, okay, the alligator, great thing, it's out in the wetlands, it's doing its thing, but what do you mean by a keystone species? Isn't it just a predator eating some things? Well, yes and no. Tends to be in subtropical wetland ecosystems. Well, the gators will go and they dig gator holes. They go out in the wetlands area, they dig these holes down, and those holes hold the fresh water. Because remember, a wetland is only underwater part of the year. So the gators dig these holes, and when the water starts to go down in the dry season, well, these holes provide an environment for fish and lots of other organisms to come into and hunker down and survive the dry season. Without the gators digging the gator holes, many of these organisms wouldn't be able to survive. They provide this refuge for lots of different kinds of aquatic life. Also, it gives an area for plants to come in, and otherwise those plants, if they didn't have that area, without the gator holes, plants would fill all of this area in, and we may not really even have as much of a wetlands, because eventually in a swamp, the plants grow, and eventually you don't have a swamp anymore. The alligators wind up helping keep it a wetland, and we need the wetlands. Now in the 1930s, the gators were hunted for sport, for the meat and skin, alligator handbags, alligator shoes, alligator boots, what have you. And by 1967, they had to get added to the endangered species list. Now, since then, they have made an impressive comeback. If you walk around any of the areas around Florida, you go to Silver Springs, you go to Lachua Trail here in Gainesville, you can see that they've made a massive, impressive comeback. We have more than 1 million gators just in Florida today. But anyway, a keystone species. The gopher tortoise is another one. It digs their gopher tortoise, and many, many things live in those gopher tortoise dens. Snakes, mice, all kinds of things. So keystone species, one that play an important role for other species and, in fact, an entire ecosystem. All right. In the book, there's a little pull-out thing. It's not really a case study, but it's similar. Pay attention to these. Don't just skip over one. And this is one about causes of amphibian decline. Now remember, amphibians tend to be one of these indicator species. They give us a heads up. Is there something wrong in the environment? Well, we looked at from the 1970s, really not all that long, 50 years, we've had 200 species, not 200 frogs, 200 species, entire species of frog go extinct. And scientists have tried to look at why. And a lot of times we want to pull the silver bullet, right? We want this one thing that's going to fix it. What's the one thing we need to do? Oh, it's not that easy. There's a lot of things in general. Being attacked by parasites, they've had viral and fungal diseases, there's habitat loss and fragmentation. Now fragmentation is this. You used to have this whole area that was a forest, and we put a housing development here. So you still have forest, but it's fragmented. It used to be that the animals would move from one side to the other, depending on the environment, rainfall, etc. And now it's become fragmented. So we have some living here and some living here, And those that needed to get to this end, they can't do it anymore, or even if they try, they die walking through the pesticides, chemicals that we put in our suburban areas. So some of it's just habitat loss. They can't live here anymore because we have a housing development, but that fragmentation causes a problem too. Many things need some contiguous forest area or wetland area to survive well. Higher levels of UV radiation. In the 60s, 70s, we were releasing lots of chlorofluorocarbons. We found these things in aerosols like hairspray, etc. Well, the chlorine in these chlorofluorocarbons was releasing up into the ozone and destroying the ozone. We didn't realize it when we pinpointed what the problem was. We banned them and the ozone's coming back. But that increase in UV radiation can kind of kill the eggs before they have a chance to hatch, kills the young before they have a chance to mature, and even kills some adults sometimes as they get out in the sun. They're getting more UV radiation than their skin can actually handle. Kind of like me, I can't take a lot of UV radiation. I get burned easily. Pollution is an effect. Once again, they kind of breathe through their skin. Their skin's a lot more sensitive to pollution. Climate change. Many of these amphibians need a very narrow range. A lot of them are actually specialist species. Very narrow range where they can live. It has to be moist, so if it dries up, they die. It has to be a certain temperature, cool. Salamanders. If you watch one of my Be Awesome videos about the Appalachians, I saw salamanders. The Appalachians are the salamander capital of the world. More species exist there than anywhere else in the world, but as temperatures change and pollution and habitat loss, they're becoming endangered. And then just overhunting. Throughout a lot of Europe, frog legs were actually good eating. And a lot of them were just overhunted, looking at them for food or meat. But anyway, these are what we believe have led to the decline in a lot of amphibian species. Some of the things we can do something about and may need to. Well, that is it for that section. Look forward to seeing you next time when we go into evolution. See you guys.